Pan's Labyrinth is Del Toro's 2006 masterpiece. Del Toro uses the fantastical to say that something about the historical. Ophelia has been thrown into a world of the fantastical, a fairy tale land that manifests itself in Ophelia's world so she can make sense of the trauma she is surrounded by. Entering innocent, but leaving with a darkened soul or mind, I would categorize Pan's Labyrinth as a gruesome fairy tale. I do not believe this movie was trying to be magical like we are used to, but to reveal the more gothic side of the fantastic. We see this especially during the scene of the Pale Man. As Ophelia draws the door from her own world into the fantasy world, there is a shift in mood, tone, and color. The fantasy world introduced a new color palette of warm golden reds and scarlet tones, in opposition to the colder, real-world palette. The color palette is meant to reflect the fact that two worlds are completely opposite. Fantasy scenes are warm and rounded, contrary to the rusty blue-grays and cold greens of straight lines of reality. Pan's Labyrinth plays around with the theme of disobedience throughout the entirety of the film. The disobedience of Ophelia, which in turn disregard the commands of the captain, her mother, and the faun, are what help her succeed in her quest to return home. The director feels as though it's important that disobedience has different outcomes. Ophelia disobeys and picks the right door with the dagger, then she disobeys because she's hungry and eats the grapes, which gets her in trouble. On the ceiling of the Pale Man's chamber, there are murals portraying the Pale Man's killing of innocent children, either by stabbing them or devouring them. Del Toro discussed the art historical influences behind his dark fairy tale in a 2006 interview. Goya was an obvious reference, specifically in regards to the character of the Pale Man. There is a scene in which the Pale Man bites the heads of fairies, and that comes straight from Goya's painting of Saturn devouring his son, a well-known art piece from the Black Paintings. From Greek mythology Kronos, or in this case Saturn from Roman mythology, the painting of Saturn devouring his son depicts the myth of Saturn, who, fearing that he would be overthrown by one of his children, ate each one upon their birth. Next to the pillar of the room, there is a pile of children's shoes, suggesting that the shoes once belonged to the children who were killed. The Pale Man represents totalitarianism, as an outside reference relating to Nazi concentration camps, as we see the pile of shoes similar to the pile belonging seen in Auschwitz. The Pale Man, as well as Captain Vidal, kills innocent people, eats their food, and is blinded by his own monstrosity. Vidal brutally murders the two innocent people at the beginning of the movie and then eats the food that has proven their innocence. He is the murderer of the innocent, which is solidified when he kills Ophelia at the end of the movie. Both the Pale Man and Vidal can never satisfy their needs. The captain mirrors the Pale Man as he dines away on his plentiful feast. Earlier in the film, we see the captain sitting in the same chair as the Pale Man. Usually, the head of the table represents those in control. During a time when most people were literally boiling roots because they had no food, the captain was living comfortably. He is hoarding food and medicine to make the rebels come to him. He sees himself almost as an overlord with his subjects, but similar to the Pale Man, he is greedy and rapacious. The Pale Man represents the power-hungry fascism of Captain Vidal and his desire to dominate and destroy anyone or anything that steals from him. Ophelia is a hungry child lured by the succulent food. She takes a few grapes but is punished for that by witnessing the savage act of ripping the heads of the two fairies. Here, the Pale Man acts as the eater and the destroyer of fantasy. That is exactly what the captain is trying to avoid by hunting down the rebels. He doesn't care who he must kill to get what he wants. He kills the rebels, the doctor, and even in ways Ophelia's mother. He wanted only a son to continue his legacy and shows no remorse throughout the pain that Ophelia's mother was having. By killing the doctor, he killed the one person who could have saved her, and then disregarded Ophelia as soon as the son was born. Del Toro originally designed the Pale Man to look like an old man who lost a lot of weight. Later, he had the face removed and put his eyes on the platter, to which Del Toro had seen in the statue of Saint Lucy, with her eyes on a platter and blood pouring out of her sockets. His arms are long and the nails on his hands are sharp and stained with the blood of the innocent. What is interesting about the Pale Man is how stretched out and weak he appears. You can see the bones of his legs as if there is nothing but a thin layer of muscle supporting them. He also trudges along as he chases Ophelia from the cave instead of running. The hanging flaps of skin and the clamminess about him imply that he was once strong and well-fed. Yet now he is desperate for food, but only a very specific type. Vidal wants success and honor, however he is too prideful to do it any other way but his own. When other men from the troops question him about his father, he denies their story so he can live out his own fate as he sees it planned. Finally, eyes, which are the trademarked characteristic of the Pale Man, play an important role throughout the entirety of the film. In the beginning, Ophelia replaces the eye in the stone, opening the portal to the fantasy world. Ophelia is one who wants to truly see the world around her. In contrast, Del Toro repeatedly shows the captain trying to limit the sight of others by blinding them time after time until at the end of the film he is blinded himself. One other thing that is constant in every eye scene is they match the right eye replaced by Ophelia. The Pale Man has his eyes on a silver platter to which they are placed into his hands to see. He then uses his right hand and eye to guide him towards Ophelia. The rebel they captured has the right eye sliced out of him, and finally, the men in the beginning are shot in the right eye, similar to how the captain's right eye rolls into the back of his head during his death. The first and last death come full circle, and Ophelia escapes into the fantasy world.